last lesson we started to look at the contrasts in urbanisation on a global level. Now we're going to look at the factors that actually affect those different rates of urbanisation. Anybody that's following it in the spec, this is 6.1b, so we're looking at this section here. Before we look at the factors that actually affect the rates of urbanisation, we just need to recap that there are different rates depending where we are in the world. So if we look on the left-hand side, in the less developed regions, Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, the rate of urbanisation is very, very high. In the next 40 years is expected to go up by nearly 2 billion, where if we look in the more developed regions, parts of Europe and North America and Australasia, we can see that the line of urbanisation is much shallower, and therefore, even though the urbanisation rates are already higher, it is actually going up at a much slower rate. So one of the most significant factors in why developing and emerging countries have such high rates of urbanisation is that lots of people, millions of people, are moving to the cities. This is a process which we call rural to urban migration. So there are certain push factors in rural areas that are making people want to leave rural areas. So it could be lack of job opportunities, it could be things like natural disasters like droughts, and they are then being pushed away from where they live and going to somewhere else where they feel like they have better opportunities, better security. And these are often urban areas in developing and emerging countries. So we also have, alongside push factors, we have pull factors. These are things that are appealing about urban areas that draw people in. It can be the fact that you might have better healthcare or education opportunities. It could be the idea that they might have better housing or the opportunity for better employment. So one of the most important factors for the huge increase in urbanisation in these areas is that lots of people are moving from rural areas to urban areas, and push and pull factors play a really important role in that. The second major factor ties in nicely with our first factor. So in developing and emerging countries, we get new economic development, so new secondary and new tertiary jobs starting in the major cities. This therefore creates jobs, and when we get jobs, this therefore attracts people from outside the city to move into the city. So as soon as we get any sort of investment in a city that creates jobs, that draws people in. And once we've got jobs and economic activity in a major city, therefore the city grows in size as people flock in to fill those jobs and to kind of make money off of those economic opportunities. The last factor to consider in why developing and emerging countries seem to have higher rates of urbanisation is that these are places where the natural increase in population is normally quite high. So natural increase is where the birth rates are higher than the death rates, which means that more people are being born than die, and therefore the population goes up. So why would this happen in developing and emerging cities? Well, a lot of the people that would migrate to these cities would be younger people, and therefore if you're a younger age, you're more likely to have children and to raise families. There might also be some throwovers of these people from rural areas that they might have lower kind of knowledge of contraceptions and family planning, and therefore that would both of those factors would increase the birth rate. But also the birth rate's going up in these cities, but also death rate would go down. And that's generally because if we look at rural areas and urban areas, that the medical services in urban areas would be better. So not only are more people being born, but more people are actually surviving, and therefore so we would get a natural increase in population. And when we have more people, therefore we're going to need to have more jobs and more houses, and so that urban area will continue to grow. The last thing to really mention is that even with developing and emerging countries, the rate of urbanisation won't be at a flat rate. It will change over time. Often this is connected with how the economy does. So as a country's economy grows, the urban area and the amount of people living in urban areas often grows as well. So a really good example to look at how urbanisation rates change over time is this example I've given of China. The yellow that I've highlighted is the percentage of the population living in urban areas. And we can see that that starts off in 1950 at being 10% of the population. We can therefore see over time that does rapidly change. And so China has gone through several stages of what we call an urbanization pathway. Stage one, between the 50s and 70s, is what we call the early stage. This is where urbanisation rates are very low and there's not much growth at this point. But then in this second stage, which China's still in at the moment, but it's taken over the last 30, 40 years, as that economy has grown, the urban area and the percentage of people living in that urban area has rapidly increased. And so we call that the accelerating stage. China's still just in that stage. But the next stage is what we go into is called the mature stage. So the economy has grown rapidly, but now it's starting to slow down. We're not getting the same levels of economic growth. And so that's what we call the mature stage. So these first two stages, this is what we would see most developing and emerging countries in at the moment. Mature stage is probably what we would see most developed countries. And there is even a stage after that. Once the urbanisation rates are really high, so in the 80s and even potentially 90s, we might see what we call a fourth stage called counter-urbanisation. That is where the urbanisation rates actually decline. This is because cities become too big and people eventually move out of the cities to slightly more rural locations. So we can see from this example that urbanisation rates do change over time, largely linked to economies and if they're growing or starting to shrink. And therefore we can see that there are the factors that will affect the rate of urbanisation at the time, and these will vary depending on where you are in the world.